But first it's time to get our thinking caps on. There's nothing we like more here than a good ponder on life's big questions. And for that we need some big thinkers. Meet today's panel. First up is a vicar whose Twitter musings have amassed him a flock of almost 93,000 followers, the Reverend Nicky Gumbel. Next to Nicky is Andrew Copson of the Humanist Association, who believes that we're now living the only life we'll ever have. And thirdly is the author Jacky Newcomb, who has penned many books about the existence of angels. This week's topic is this all there is? And if that was divine intervention, I think I'm not going to say. Do we believe that there is more to life than just our current existence? I have my answer. Nicky, why don't you start us off?
Well, I do believe that there's more to life than this. I believe there's a God who loves us, and that love never dies. And the reason I believe that is because of the life, death and resurrection of Jesus.
But you didn't always feel like that. You were an atheist, so yes. There was a Damascene conversion for you. I was brought up in an atheistic home, and I didn't have any kind of church-going upbringing, but it was through reading the New Testament that I came to believe. I had an encounter with Jesus that completely changed my life. And then when I studied the evidence, I practiced as a barrister for a few years, right? Looked at the evidence for the life, death and resurrection of Jesus. And it's particularly the resurrection of Jesus that made me believe that, because otherwise you think you die, you're buried, looks very final, but Jesus died and was buried, and it wasn't the end. God raised him to life. And for you, so Andrew, for you, that is not, you feel, the case?
No, I think that this is all that there is, this reality, this universe, this world that we're inhabiting, all the other people who are inhabiting it with us, is all there is. But I slightly object to the way the question is phrased, because I don't think it's right to say this is all there is, because I think that's quite a lot. I think the world and all the wonderful things that it contains, the natural world of the people...
That's it. When you die, you think you've gone.
Absolutely. I think that death is the end of the individual personality. I think that we remember people in our own minds. I think that we live on in lives by children and grandchildren, the achievements we may have had in all those other ways, but I don't think that the individual personality goes on after that. And I think, actually, it's quite difficult when you start to think of it to understand what infinite existence might really be like. Everything that we know in this world that we're living in now, everything that we enjoy, everything that we appreciate, has an end. And the end is almost as important as the bit that comes before it. If you are eating a lovely cake, as you do on this programme quite often, if you're eating a lovely cake, you might think, oh, wonderful, this is a great experience, I wish it could go on forever. If it did go on forever, you would very soon become bored by it.
Let me come back on that very briefly before I bring Jacky in. Nicky, it would be alarming if it went on forever.
Eternal life is a quality of life which starts now and goes on forever, and that is it's a relationship with God which Jesus has made possible, and that relationship is eternal, and that gives an amazing hope. But it's not wishful thinking because it's based on good historical evidence, the life, death and resurrection of Jesus.
Let me bring, just before, Jacky, you're a great believer in angels, so you kind of cross, I suppose in a way, these two areas, but particularly very much on Nicky's side.
Well, both really, angels and the afterlife. In that I've published, 17 of the books that I've published are full of stories of people's real-life angel and afterlife experiences. So we're not talking about the continuation of the physical body, clearly. But what we are talking about here is the continuation of a soul or a spirit. And there are, I mean, in my books alone, I mean, thousands and thousands of people who've written to me from all over the world who've had experiences where a deceased loved one or an angel has interacted with them.
Have you had an experience?
Oh, I've had loads. I had one where a deceased uncle came to visit me to warn me that my father shouldn't have an operation. We were on holiday at the time in Spain, and my dad wasn't even unwell. And then later on in the day, my dad became very poorly and was rushed into a Spanish hospital. All the problems with the language barrier and everything that goes with that. And what they wanted to do was an exploratory operation to find out what was going on in his stomach. And I sort of had a chat with my mother, and I phoned home to the UK, what do we do, what do we do? And my mum very clearly said, either we believe in this stuff or we don't. You know, your message was very clear, let's fly him home. And we had to sign to say that we were happy to take him out of the country. And the doctors in my local hospital said, well, good job they didn't start messing around, you know, he wasn't well enough for them to do that. And it was just gallstones, they just took them out and problem solved.
So you put this down to divine intervention, then?
Absolutely.
Andrew, your reaction to that?
Well, I think, I mean, the human brain, we know it, the human mind is an incredibly imaginative and creative thing. We see faces in the clouds that aren't there. We see meaning and patterns all around us which don't really exist. And a lot of things that we would like to believe are true, like that there is life after death, or that we've had warnings or experiences of this sort. We would like to believe a lot of those things, but I don't think that because you want to believe something is true, that necessarily makes it true.
But are you open to believing anything else, or have you said this is
Absolutely.
how it is?
I think that the right way to decide what to believe is to look for evidence that something has happened, to test it again, to look at the experience of the whole, to think, is there something else that could account for this?
Well, we call it
be
faith.
Coincidence?
We call it faith, which doesn't necessarily... Nikki, let me bring you in. I mean, what's your response to Andrew?
Well, I think faith is what it requires. But it's not a kind of blind leap of faith. It's faith based on good evidence. And there's all kinds of evidence. And people say, well, is there any scientific evidence? But that's not the only type of evidence. As a barrister, I looked at a type of evidence that in court, which is similar to historical evidence. It's similar to the kind of evidence on which I put my faith now.
But people would say, you know, is it sufficient to just know that Christ lived? Is that sufficient evidence on which to base a faith?
It's not just that he lived. There's good evidence, of course, that he did live. There's a historical fact that he lived. But it's more than that he lived, that he died, and the evidence for the resurrection. In particular, it's the evidence for the resurrection that I find so compelling.
Impulsive. Yeah, compelling. Yeah.
I wonder if I could pick up on the point about hope earlier, because the point was made that somehow if an afterlife exists, then there's hope, and the implication being that if it doesn't, then there isn't any hope. But I don't think that the right reaction to saying that death is the end of individual personality is to say that there's no hope. I remember once I was visiting my grandfather in hospital, and my grandmother was sitting next to him and she was holding his hand, and we were surrounded by old and dying people. You know, it was a situation that made very vivid the fact that all of our lives are going to come to an end. And she looked at me, she looked me in the eye and she said, "Enjoy your life, that's all I can say." And I think that the fact of death, the fact that we know that this is the only life that we know we have, actually is an invitation and a call and an injunction to live life well in the here and now, every day well for yourself.
Well, one thing we do know, there's certainly value in that, value in faith, and one thing we do know is that there is only one way we're going to find out, and we'll never be able to come back and carry on.